Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Live with me, Astengo. Now today we're talking about housing after GBC's shocking report earlier this month on the plight of one particular individual with a medical condition who was living in appalling conditions. The government's response was sympathetic, but it said it was generally satisfied with its housing record. Opposition parties disagreed, as did local pressure group Action for Housing, who accused the government of failing to provide rental housing for those in need. Well, let's find out how matters are progressing. I'm delighted, as always, to be joined once again in the studio by the Minister for Housing, Mr Linares, and
Hi.
Action for Housing's Mr Pinna.
Hello.
Good afternoon,
Afternoon.
gentlemen. Right, well, let's get straight to it. Minister, if the housing system works, then why have individuals such as the one that we identified in the report that we did together with Action for Housing, why has he not been housed yet? When you take into consideration his medical condition and the appalling condition that he's living in, why has he not been housed yet?
Well, first of all, I must say that not everybody should be housed in government housing. There is a private sector section that people need to live in the private. In this case, and I've visited the man, I've already gone to see him. I think it's appalling the way he's living. I agree with what the program said. But having said that, there is a responsibility of the private landlord as well to have all the amenities that these people need. They do pay rent, and therefore they are clients of the private sector. Now, that does not mean that government don't need to house people like the man that I saw and the way he was and all that, with all these medical issues. Of course, government has a responsibility to house him.
Why haven't you then?
Well, because there are many on the housing waiting list, on the housing A list and the housing A plus list. All these lists which we are reviewing now, because it's incredible how many lists I have inherited. And that came from the previous administration, where they used to put lists in order to try and cover up the problem. Now, what I'm saying is that it's all very well for the opposition and Action for Housing to point the finger at government, which they have the right to do so, and I am quite... I'm aware of it, and these people have been housed. Only this week, we've already had 11 people who will be housed in the medical A and the social list.
One moment, Minister, one moment. First of all, on the landlords, we'll tackle the landlords separately because, as you very well know, that they are trapped with the control rent situation and they are waiting for an update on the Housing Act. But let's just go to the people on the medical list, because I know, Henry, you... have information about people. So this is just a general observation rather than individuals. But you have observations of people who've been on the medical list for many, many years and high up and still haven't been allocated.
First of all, let me say that in the 2015 manifesto, the GSLP Liberals said that new homes were to come on stream for those applicants who would prefer to stay on the waiting lists. Now, this has happened, but very, very slowly. I mean, the waiting time is enormous. So it's all right to say that housing will come on stream, blah, blah, blah. But then when it comes to the crunch, the waiting time is immense. No? And I'm going to give the minister one example without mentioning names, but I'll give him the letter later on. It's a letter sent to an applicant which said, the government will shortly allocate Charles Brusson House and Semester Lodge, purposely built flats for our senior citizens. Completion of sales of Monscalpi Mews and Beachview terraces are imminent. And then it says, as a result of the above process, government rental properties will become available the next weeks for subsequent allocations via the waiting list.
But they are
and it says, I'm glad to inform you that one of these properties has been identified for you on the basis of your current room entitlement. This letter was signed, or rather the date of the letter was the 30th of October 2015. So this gentleman, this applicant, got a letter over 5 years ago, saying that, a flat had been earmarked. Well, and this gentleman has been on the waiting list. I mean, he's on the second, third and fourth position for the past 2 years.
How is that possible,
why
Minister?
wasn't he allocated? I mean, and this is just an example of many that I can give, but, I won't because...
Well,
Why does that
we lack
happen?
the time.
Let's let the minister
but I
answer.
am not aware of this. You see, this is the issue. Look, Henry.
No,
One
you are
moment, please.
aware. Sorry.
Let's
let the
Minister,
minister
answer.
You are
Well,
aware because
Henry has
you are
had a
aware. No,
meeting.
sorry. Let me.
We need to
But-
let the minister
You are
answer.
aware
Yes,
because
if
we
I
sent
may,
you.
if
we
I may
sent
answer,
You, we
he
sent
can
you a
bring all the
letter.
letters he wants.
We
and
sent you a
these-
letter on the 5th of November 2020
Okay,
where
fair
we
point.
highlighted this particular case.
Okay.
And you never replied.
Okay, first of all...
First of all, look, I take issue with him that I never replied. This is a nonsense from Henry.
No, you never replied to
Henry
this.
knows.
Let's let the minister
this
reply.
particular letter, you never
Henry
replied.
knows. He's had a meeting with my staff today. I met him on the 20th of April, just only last week.
Okay, but the
I
real
have been-
issue-
But you never replied on this particular
you
case, Minister.
No, I did
never did.
reply in
Okay,
meetings with you.
let's have an
But,
answer. Why
no,
is
because
this...
I take offence that he's met with my officials today, this morning, before coming to
And
this
we brought
program.
up this
And now he
particular-
brings
and-
up this
and we
case.
brought
Okay.
Why didn't you bring
no,
this case up this
Okay,
morning?
one
then?
moment, please.
But we
One
did.
moment.
You
Both
bring
of
it
you.
up
Both of
publicly.
you.
Okay.
Both
Minister,
of you.
If that
Minister,
is the
you
case...
weren't there this morning.
No, but
but
it's
we
not-
did,
I
we
don't
did,
have
we
to
did
be
raise
there.
up this particular
I
case.
don't have
Both
to
of
be
you
there.
stop,
We were
please.
told
Please,
it's got to wait.
please. Because
Okay.
what we want to know is why is it that there are cases, there are people who have been on the waiting list and they're second or third or fourth position, even on the medical list for a number of years, and they weren't part of the batch of 61 people who were allocated properties with
Ross,
a medical priority. Why is that?
Well, I took the time of having an interview with GBC, 24-minute interview explaining exactly all the way in which we are dealing with all these issues. You cannot expect somebody who might be in the medical A+ and might be number 2, and that person needs a 2 RKB, and I haven't got the availability of a 2 RKB. There is another list which is a 3 RKB. I might have homed or housed from the medical list the 3 RKB instead of the 2 RKB. And I went through the whole... Sorry, but I have to explain this because it's important that we have already explained all these issues. Henry comes every month to the housing with my officials and brings these issues up. And we try our best to home as many people as we can on the medical A, on the social, and all others, because it's not only the medical A and the social. There are many other people who need homes because of overcrowding, other people who need homes for other reasons. So I'm not going to let Henry away with this one that I did not answer. He brings letters to me nearly every other week, and he gets an answer to all the letters that he writes to me. We go through, and only last Tuesday week, we had a meeting after the debacle of the whole public thing. I am not the sort of minister that is take grudges. I'm the sort of minister that he went public, which I thought was a bit out of order, but it's his right. He wanted to go public. But then I met him and we went through all the issues that he wanted to highlight.
Okay, let's let Henry respond.
And for him to now say that I don't answer letters, I mean, I will not take that, Henry.
We must insist that you did not
you can
reply.
insist all you want.
We must insist that you did not reply to this particular letter.
Let's park the issue of responding to letters and stick to the topic, please.
With all due respect, Minister, you know, your rhetoric will not in any way alleviate or console.
What rhetoric?
It is rhetoric.
It's fact.
I mean,
You've had your say.
Minister, you've had your say.
Minister.
Now let me have my
fine.
say. No, let's be civilized and polite.
Yeah,
now,
okay.
Okay. So
I asked that from you as well,
your rhetoric will not in any way impress or console those who've been for years, you know, on the medical, the social, and all the other lists, waiting for an allocation. And the problem is that you don't have enough flats to go around. The demand is huge and the supply is meager. So however much you might argue and try to convince those who are on the waiting list, they will not be convinced because the only way to convince these people is to allocate them flats.
Okay,
and you're not doing it.
Let's put that to the minister. The fact that the policy of waiting for building new flats for the elderly and for 50-50 and waiting for housing stock to be returned to the government is too slow a process as it isn't meeting demand. I think that's what Action for Housing is saying.
Look, I agree partially with him, right? There is a demand, but the housing is there. What I have a problem, and I'm sorting it out, because Henry knows that sometimes he brings problems to me, and we do sort it out, is the turnover of flats. And that is part and parcel of what I explained in my 24-minute interview. There are times from the time that somebody vacates a flat and brings the key in to the time that the key can be given to somebody else is taking too long. And I admit to that. And I am taking steps, very drastic steps, in order for the turnover to happen. When the turnover happens quickly, there will be more availability of flats, and that is the problem. That's why I don't agree with him that we don't have enough flats. We have enough stock. The only thing is that the turnover might take time.
Let me just
and
ask
that is an issue.
Let me just go back to the gentleman who you visited, who was the subject of the GBC report. He's been waiting. He's concerned he's going to die before he gets moved to a suitable place. Let's recall that where he's living, he doesn't have any running water.
No, he does have running water.
On the terrace, outside, a hose on the terrace.
Yes, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yes. It is disgraceful. I've said it's disgraceful. Where is the private landlord to give him running water?
Well, let's talk about the Housing Act then, part 2, because you said last July that you were looking at, already starting last July, to draft a remodernise Housing Act, because obviously these landlords say that they are very restricted. They're only getting £15 a week in rent, and that means that they cannot carry out the necessary works and refurbishment works that are necessary. And how that act, that hasn't been updated for 50 years, is restricting
50?
them. That's what he said, Rodney Pereira said.
50?
That's
2007 was the last time it was...
No, but the issue of rent control is what he's talking about.
Well, he's wrong, obviously.
Okay, so can we just find out when that act is going to be updated?
In the last meeting that we had with Henry, I've invited Henry to another meeting, which will be within 2 weeks maximum. He knows that.
This time I agree with you, Minister.
Yes, we're going to go through the law, because what they have done is, which I'm happy about, is that they've submitted their take on how the act should look like. No? So we got the landlords on the one hand, who see the law in their side, and Action for Housing and other people see it on the tenant side. I need to, as a minister, take both sides and then put the law. And I've invited, and they have kindly come in with ideas of how the law should be done. So I've invited Action for Housing to go clause by clause through the part 2, which is the part that concerns the private landlords. And I'm happy to sit down and openly discuss these issues. So this is where we are.
When is that being updated then?
The update is not. When you update a law, it takes time.
Yeah.
I've already done all part 1.
Yeah.
We're now on to the part 2.
That's right.
And the part 2, like I said, I've invited different parties, because there is 2 ways in which you can do a consultation exercise. You can either do a consultation exercise before the bill is actually drafted, and then you can do a consultation exercise after the bill is drafted, and that is called the command paper.
Okay.
You put it as a command paper. People are then allowed to comment. I have allowed the Action for Housing to do that before that, so that we can, when the draft comes out, and if even then, if Action for Housing is not happy with the draft, because we might not take all their points, they can come back to the command paper and have their say.
Okay, one moment, Minister. I want to put to Henry, because you raised a concern of the fact that once the rent control is withdrawn, that is going to create another problem, because the sort of people who live in those dwellings can't really afford much more. So then what happens to them? So that raises issues again about housing stock and sufficient housing stock.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that it is a vicious circle because the rents in the rent control flats are very low. But should they be increased, then many of the people who live there would not be able to afford them, and then government would have to provide them with government housing, which we don't have. So again, it's
Right.
it's a trap. Whichever way you move, we have to be very careful as to how we deal with rent control flats. Also, flats in the post war scenario are extremely high because we are talking about supply and demand. So as long as people are willing to pay £1,000 for rental or even more, that sort of precludes people who can't afford to rent in post-war accommodation. So you have got to do a very good balancing act to provide for both those who live in the post-war accommodations and post-war accommodations. That's why we have to sit with government and look at the act and see how best we can handle it.
Okay. But look, in certain cases, like the man that went on television, he's paying more than people pay in Varelbeg. I mean, it's incredible. I don't agree all along that they're not paying their way. This man pays a good rent. I mean, it's not...
What's a good rent?
Well, if I tell you that he pays £78 a month, right, it's not a lot. I agree. But in Varelbeg, they are paying £62 to £70 a month. So there is, and I agree with Henry, there is a distortion here, a complete distortion of the whole market. You got government rental, which is not high, it's very, very low. You get private rentals, like the case of this man, who is hiring one room for £78 a month.
And yet the government doesn't agree on means testing.
That is why I turn it to the landlord.
Perhaps he could take his case to the rent tribunal. Perhaps he's been overcharged. Perhaps,
Henry. One moment, please.
Perhaps he's been overcharged. If he were to take his case to the rent tribunal,
Henry,
it might be reduced.
Let's stick to the general issue.
It is not that. That is not the issue. The issue has to be the landlord's responsibility for this man who lives in a small room.
I'm sorry, how can the landlord take responsibility for refurbishing these houses, which will cost them £15,000-20,000 to do what they need to do? That's what he says when they're only getting £15 a week.
£15,000-20,000 a month. Refurbishing what? Refurbishing a toilet? Come on.
Minister, you saw the state of some of those properties.
A shower, a toilet, a kitchen. That doesn't cost £15,000 or £20,000 to refurbish. No, and by the way, it's only that man who's paying £78 for one room. There are other rooms in the same place who are all paying £78, and they share the toilet.
Okay.
So the responsibility has to be the landlord.
Okay.
Now,
there's
of
clear
course, the
disagreement
government
there.
takes a responsibility for all the rental accommodation that we rent out.
Final comments from both of you, please. 30 seconds each.
The final comment that we make is that unless government is willing and prepared to construct and provide housing for rental, the perennial housing shortage will last forever.
Okay.
I don't agree with that at all, because even if we decided tomorrow to do the rental accommodation, we'd still have the same problem for 4 years until the houses are built. And all I'm saying is, once the affordable homes are built and people move out, then we will have a very good stock.
Okay, we're talking about waiting another 2 to 3 years.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. But I am fast tracking many people, and Henry knows this. It's that we do chains, which I again explained in my interview, on how we're trying to fast track people so that we are looking at empty flats that have been there for a while, and I'm not happy about that.
That is not enough.
And we will do something about it and get them housed and used and all that. So
that is not enough.
Thank you.
That's
I'm sorry, I disagree with you.
So
we're going to have to leave it there.
As usual,
we agree to disagree
Thank
as
you,
always.
gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us so openly about the issue, and hopefully we'll see you again. You're listening to Radio Gibraltar.